Okay, so greetings to everybody. Shalom to everyone. Let's begin with a couple of thank yous. First of all, thank you to Ariel, who in Cape Town is manning the technical side of this to make it work. And thanks for all the work he does on the website. Thank you to my daughter Nechama in Oxford, who is responsible for setting up the website originally. And thanks to all of you for your support. First of all, I'd just like to say that one of the main reasons I try to do these webinars before or during the festivals and a couple other times during the year is just to thank and acknowledge the support of people on the newsletter and the website. I must say that I'm particularly appreciative of donations that people make. I hope everyone knows that we've never solicited any donations. The idea is to run the website as a service and to make Torah available to people. But of course, as everyone understands, it takes funding. And so I must say that we've had a tremendous number of people just spontaneously making donations through the website, and I greatly appreciate it. And I try to give these exclusive talks to the people who signed up for that. So thank you very much again. Another technical piece of news is that we are migrating to a different format or different host for the newsletters. So if you're going to get these newsletters in the future, you may find them going into spam or disappearing. So please just take note of that. Make sure you get the newsletters. Let us know if you're not getting them for some reason, just to make sure that you're registering the new system and that it's operating for you. I'm sure Ariel will send out a little note about that and notify us when that's going to happen and how you actually migrate to the new system. Fine. So let us talk a little bit about Hanukkah. Let me share with you an idea that I hope you'll find useful and thought-provoking and interesting. And you're welcome to put a comment or a question in the chat. I hope I'll see it. If not, feel free to email me. You all have our dedicated email address. Email me through the site or privately. You're very welcome to do that. And by the way, greetings to some old friends whom I see from around the world. Nice to see you with us. And finally, those of you who are appearing my screen as a black box, I perfectly respect that and it's fine, but it's easier to speak to human beings. Now, as I always say, I know that if you haven't had your nails painted green with silver glitter or had your eyelashes curled, then, you know, I'm perfectly understanding of that. I take great care to curl my eyelashes before I give these talks. But it's easy to speak to human beings and see that people are following or that they're awake. So that helps me if you do that. Let me share with you an idea about Hanukkah, and a little bit broader than Hanukkah only. And I hope you'll find this interesting. And you're welcome to communicate with me about it if something's not clear or you want to take it further. Can I just ask for a wave from couple of people just to make sure that I'm being heard and seen? Can you do that? Okay, thank you. There is a famous question attributed to the Beis Yosef. We're going back now 400 years, which is, let me tell you the question, and then I will tell you one particular answer that I'd like to share with you, and use that as a format for building an idea that I hope you find useful and important. And that question is probably the most famous question asked about Hanukkah, and possibly the most famous question maybe in all of Judaism of this type. I'm not sure it's the most difficult or the most important question, but it's a very, very interesting question. And if you haven't heard this question about Hanukkah, you really haven't approached Hanukkah in a, I would say, professional way, or from the perspective of the nuance and the jargon of the yeshiva world. This is something everyone ought to know. And the question is as follows. We know that Hanukkah celebrates a miracle that is fundamental to understanding the nature of Hanukkah. Let me just digress for half a moment to point out to you that every festival adds miracles. I don't know if people are familiar with that. Every Yom Tov, every Chag, every festival in the Jewish year adds new Torah and a new miracle. Think about it for a moment. Pesach is miraculous. Shavuot is miraculous. Shavuos, Sukkot is miraculous. They all celebrate a miracle. They all bring a new dimension of Torah to the world, and they all bring a miracle to the world. And the two rabbinic festivals of Purim and Hanukkah are no different. They also celebrate miracles. There's an interesting discussion about what exactly the miracle of Hanukkah is. Everyone takes it for granted that the miracle of Hanukkah is the candles, the oil that burned for 8 days. Probably more fundamental is the winning of the war against the Greeks. You look, when you see Lana Nissim, you see the way we celebrated. There's no question that the more significant miracle, by far the more important one in terms of Jewish history, is the victory, salvation of the Jews, the victory over the Greeks. In fact, the miracle of the oil in the Beis Hamikdash, in the temple, was really only after the war was won. It really was very private. Only the Kohanim saw it. It wasn't visible to the nation. It had nothing to do with the salvation of the Jewish people. Again, it was a sign or a simon that was given to the Jews after the war was won. But nevertheless, that's the famous miracle of Hanukkah. And of course, we use that as a publicizing of the miracle, what we call Pirsum Nissa. We use the reminiscence or the memory, if you like, the celebration of that light by lighting similar or parallel lights in our windows. And that's very well known. But whichever way you look at it, there's no question that the celebration of Hanukkah is a miracle. That's very important to understand. Miracles are not simply just aberrations that sort of occur from time to time. Miracles are the foundation of the Jewish people and of the Torah. It's very important to understand that. And it's for this reason that you find our greats like the Maharal going into a long, fantastic discussion of the order of miracles and the structure of miracles. I highly recommend that to anyone who wants to look it up. It's the second introduction to Sefer HaGvuros, which the Maharal wrote on Pesach. Absolutely fundamental and more than fundamental, a deep analysis, not easy, by the way, not easy, a difficult piece, but a fundamental analysis of the nature and the program of miracles, the organizing principles behind historical miracles in Judaism. So it's very important to know that we are based on the miraculous. This is a fundamental theme within Judaism. And as I said, the rabbinic festivals of Purim and Hanukkah are no different. Of course, they celebrate the types of miracles that are suitable and fitting in a rabbinic era. Purim, after all, celebrates a miracle that is a hidden miracle. At Purim, no dead are revived, the sea doesn't split, manna doesn't fall from heaven. All that happens is there's a inversion of political events in a hidden fashion. The Purim is the essential festival of hidden miracles. And then, of course, Hanukkah is also a miracle that is not revealed in the conventional sense. At Hanukkah, again, the ocean was not split, manna didn't fall from heaven, dead people weren't revived. There was a victory of a few over many. Yes, it's true there was this symbolic, if I had to use that word, but let's call it symbolic miracle of oil burning for 8 days when there was only enough for one. That is true. That was a way of goodbye from that dimension of miracles. But the essential aspect of Hanukkah is that it introduces a dimension of the oral law, which is the dimension of hidden miracles. But be that as it may, the fact is we celebrate miracles. Now the miracle of the oil raises a fundamental problem. And here comes the famous question of the Bet Yosef. And he puts it like this. We all know the story that the Greeks had contaminated the temple. They had taken apart and contaminated the altar and all the vessels in the temple and all the oil that was available. And therefore, when the Hashmonaim came into the temple, the second temple, and cleaned it and rededicated it, and they wished to fulfill the mitzvah of the menorah, of lighting the 7-branched menorah, which was the one of the 4 central kalim or vessels of the temple, there was no pure oil, and therefore they would have been forced to light it with contaminated oil. It's true they could have done that. Contaminated oil in a public mitzvah of that kind could be used, but of course, as a rededication, a point of inauguration, if you like, of a historical phase of a temple, obviously it is far superior to use oil that is pure, despite the halachic permissibility of using oil that is not. And they were desperately looking and searching, hoping to find pure oil. And as we all know, they found 1 bottle or 1 cruse of pure oil, and that was the oil they used to light the menorah. The problem was there was only 1 jar or 1 bottle, and that was to last only for 1 day. There was only enough oil sealed with a seal of the high priest of the Kohen Gadol. Let's not forget that Hanukkah was a battle of the high priests against the Greek culture and society and might. And there was only enough oil for 1 day. Now, logic will tell us that if there's oil for 1 day and you light the oil and miraculously it burns for 8 days, technically speaking, there were only 7 days of miracle. Right? Stay with me carefully. You have to understand the question. Those who are not familiar with the question need to register the question clearly. The question is, there was enough oil for 1 day, but it burned for 8 days. Therefore, the inescapable conclusion is that the miracle lasted only for 7 days, right? Everyone with me on that? You see the logic of that? There's enough oil for 1 day, it burns for 8. The first day is not miraculous. The first day is natural. There was oil for the first day. But when the oil continues into the second day, when strictly speaking, there shouldn't have been any oil left and it burns for 8 days, you have 1 natural day and 7 miraculous days. Now, surely if you enact a festival to celebrate the days of miracle, that should only be a 7-day festival. There should only be a 7-day festival. They're only celebrating 7 days of miracle. How come Hanukkah's 8 days? That's the famous question of the Bet Yosef. And that is such a famous question. It's a purely logical question. And just to summarize one more time, 1 natural day, 7 miraculous days. We're celebrating miracle. After all, that's the basic idea of Hanukkah. We should have a 7-day festival. It's true. We are very interested in 8 days. 8 in Kabbalistic thinking is always the miraculous, right? The Maharal points that out time and again. 7 is always the number of the natural world. 7 days in the week, 7 lights or colors in the spectrum, 7 notes in the classical musical scale that we use, 7 fruits of Israel. That's the natural. The natural world is based on the number 7. After all, there are 6 facets to the cube, and the center which binds them together, which is the 7th element. 8 always transcends. The very word shmone in Hebrew, which means 8, is the same word as shemen. Not only is shemen oil, the Hanukkah oil, but oil means fat. Fat or oil means which is beyond the minimum. The bare lean minimum, and then you have fat which goes beyond. Shamein means more. 8 means more than the natural world, right? Anyone who knows a little Hebrew knows that the word shmone, which is 8, is the same letters as the word Mishnah, right? Mishnah is the interpretation. That means the extension of the Torah into its practical application. And the same letters, if you rearrange them, spell neshama, the soul, right? What better illustration of the fact that we're talking about something that's transnatural. Also, circumcision is done on the 8th day because you're taking the body and giving it the ability to transcend into holiness. 8 is always the number of transcendence. And this, obviously, Hanukkah needs to be 8 days. However, the technical reason, the reason that we celebrate Hanukkah is to celebrate the miracle, and there were only 7 miraculous days. Now, that is the question of the Bet Yosef, and this question has taken the interest of many, many thinkers in the last 400 years since he wrote it. Most famous of all is a book that was written some years ago called Ner Lemea. And this book, I have a copy here, highly recommended for those who have liked something interesting to think about on Hanukkah. I don't know if this has ever been translated into English, but Ner Lemea is a book containing 100 answers to that question, 100 answers. It's a beautiful title because Ner Lemea comes from a very beautiful Jewish expression, which is Ner Le'echad, Ner Lemea. A light for one, a candle for one is a candle for 100, meaning if you're in a dark place and you hold up a candle to light the way of one individual, 100 people can benefit. When you light a candle for one, if there are 100 people present, they can all benefit. They don't take away. If you have one slice of bread, only one person can eat it. But one candle can be used by 100 people just as well as by one. And therefore it's called Ner Lemea, Ner Le'echad, Ner Lemea. A candle for one is a candle for 100, which is an exquisite name for a book about this question about Hanukkah candles, right? And it's called Ner Lemea, a light for 100, and it contains 100 answers to this question. And if you'd like something to keep you awake for the next few days of Hanukkah, you can work through that book. To make matters worse or better, I came across this book recently, which, believe it or not, contains 500 answers to the same question. This book is called Yemei Shmoineh, Hanukkah, and this is a book containing 500 answers. Now, many of them true are variations on a theme, that is true, but nevertheless, there are 500 distinct answers to this question, and no doubt, since that book is If You Can Do It, I Can Do It Better, next year somebody's going to publish a book with 1,000 answers to this question. And it brings to mind, Havdil, in the secular world, how many proofs are there of Pythagoras' theorem? How many distinct proofs are there of Pythagoras? There's a famous book written about this in the last couple, maybe 60, 70 years ago, of over 300 beautiful proofs of Pythagoras. If you're a mathematician or you're interested in geometry, look it up. One fantastic one from a 16-year-old American girl came up with an original proof of Pythagoras. Some of them are graphic, some are algebraic, right? Fascinating book. Anyway, we, of course, are doing better than them. we have 500 answers to this question. Now, you can spend a lot of time thinking about the answers, and some of them are very famous. I mean, one of them, one famous answer is that they didn't light all the oil on the first day, and then there was 7 days of miracle. They used only 1/8 on each day. So each day was a miracle in itself because there was only 1/8 of a day's worth of oil and it burnt all day. They are very creative answers, and as I say, you can work through hundreds of them. I'd like to just take one of them and use it as a basis for exploring a theme in Judaism. And that answer is, and as Max has pointed out on this particular webinar, of course, one answer is it was miraculous that they found even the one jar of oil. That was also miraculous. There's no shortage of answers to the question. But here's one that I'd like to explore with you. And that is that 7 days of Hanukkah are there to celebrate the miracle, and the 8th day is to celebrate the fact that the natural is also miraculous. Think about that. In other words, yes, it's true that you have 7 miraculous days, but we add another day to show that the day that you think is natural, when that oil burns for the first day, and there's enough oil to burn for the first day, you think, well, that's okay, that's natural. No, oil only burns because Hashem wants it to burn. And if Hashem wants oil to burn for 1 day, he can make it burn for 8 days. And therefore, we celebrate 8 days deliberately to show, and specifically to show, we're not only celebrating the transcendent. That would be a mistake. That would be an error. The transcendent teaches us that the natural is also a transcendence. The classic source for this idea, of course, is not Hanukkah, but it's the famous Ramban at the end of Parshas Boy. Let me mention that. It's an absolute classic. I see Chaim is nodding his head, and anybody who knows a little bit about the subject will immediately identify that as the classic source. And there the Ramban says, talking about miracles, the great Ramban Nachmanides I'm talking about. Look it up, it's fascinating. He says something very, very extreme and stark. He says that it is very important to know that when you study the miracles in Torah, as a Jew, you need to know that the natural world is as miraculous as the miraculous. His language is, the way he puts it, he says, a Jew needs to know that there's no such thing as natural. Anything that we register as natural, ein bahem nes, his language is, ein bahem tava, there's no such thing as the natural. What we call natural comes from exactly the same place as the supernatural. And he says you have no share in the Torah of Moshe, which means you do not qualify for a Jew, for being a Jew in this sense. If you think that there's a categorical distinction between the natural and the miraculous, you think the miraculous is done by God and the natural operates by itself. True, it was made by God, it was made by Hashem, but now it operates on its own. When God interferes, he acts directly, that's called miracle. When God doesn't interfere, the natural operates on its own. You have no share in Torah if you think that way. Look up the language of the Ramban, it's very stark, classic, it's right at the end of the Parsha Boy, and it's probably the best known few lines that the Ramban sets up, and it's a teaching in itself. What the Ramban means here, he does not mean that there's no such thing as the natural at all. That's a gross misunderstanding. The Ramban knows as well as any of us that there is a natural world out there, at least that our perception demonstrates to us a natural world. But what he's telling you is that the source of the natural is exactly the same as the source of supernatural. The Ramban's not blurring the distinction between natural and supernatural in terms of the manifestation in the world, right? The Torah itself clearly indicates that when the sea splits or dead people are revived or manna falls from the sky, that is a breaking of the rules of nature. Now, no one's denying that. But what the Ramban's teaching you is, do not think for a moment that what you call the natural is a self-sustaining, self-maintaining, self-generating system of cause and effect, right? In philosophy, that would be known as what they call the watchmaker theory. God created the world like a watchmaker. He winds it up and he lets it run, and then it runs on its own. Hashem created the world and it now runs on its own, independent of him. Sometimes he puts his hand in and he maneuvers things, then he performs a miracle. That is utterly wrong. As the first 2 pages of the Nefesh HaChaim explain, Hashem pours his creative energy. He pours his being into reality at all times. And if he would stop it for a moment, everything would disappear, which means he needs to pour his creative energy into the world to sustain miracles, and he needs to pour the same creative energy into the world to sustain the natural. True, the one operates the rules of the natural, and the other one operates according to the rules of the miraculous. And the Ramban's not denying that. There are 2 systems in the world. But the point is they both come from the same place. That's the important thing to understand. The only difference is, how distant are you from that source? That means And here comes the thing I'd like to talk about in detail. When a miracle occurs, you are seeing Hashem's emanation into the world directly close to source. When you operate the natural, when you see the natural operating in the world, you're seeing Hashem's emanation at a greater distance, through more layers, through more filters, through more masks and veils. And that is the concept. What the Ramban is saying is, when you see something through a veil and you see it darkly, it appears to be independent. The more veils are interposed, that are interposed between Hashem's face and the world, the more you are tempted to see things as independent. And that's where Jewish belief comes in, Jewish understanding comes in, is that there may be more veils or interfaces between him and us that doesn't change for a moment the fact that they all come from the same place. Let me give you a beautiful illustration of this, which I hope you'll find meaningful, and I hope it'll be a key for you to open many areas of Torah that some people find challenging. I heard this particular version of this theme from Rabbi Avram Lappin, a wonderful teacher from the last generation. He happened to be South African. He later ended up in California. His sons are very, very talented Torah teachers, each one in his own right. And I've merited to gain from the Torah of him indirectly, and from his sons, some directly and some indirectly. And you can listen to recordings of Rabbi Avram Lappin's Shiurim. Very unusual. He was a person who began a very creative method of deep Torah teaching long before the so-called modern Kiruv movement. You know, today we have what we call a Kiruv movement, outreach, Jewish outreach, which means that people like myself reaching out to Jews who have less formal background in Judaism. And of course, there's a taste for hearing very deep and sophisticated ideas in Torah, as opposed to the sort of the run-of-the-mill, very ordinary, dare I say, boring methods of teaching that were on the scene before this movement came along. He was teaching very creatively and very, very deeply, long before it became popular in the general, shall I say, secular Jewish world. And his shiurim are worth listening to for that alone. Not only that, he was a gifted teacher as well. But let me tell you an experience that I heard from him that really opens up a number of worlds for us. He learned in Telz. He was sent to Europe, to Telz, and he learned in the great Telz Yeshiva, and his Rosh Yeshiva was the Telz Rosh Yeshiva of Bloch. And he said on one occasion when he was a young unmarried man in the yeshiva, Rav Bloch used to let them ask questions. I think it was Shabbos afternoon. They used to sit and have free, open-ended discussions. The boys would ask questions. The Rosh Yeshiva would stimulate their thinking and answer them. And on one occasion, he asked the rabbi, he asked his Rosh Yeshiva the following question. He asked him, we have a very disturbing phenomenon in Torah, which is that we anthropomorphize, we give human attributes to inanimate objects, to animals. Midrashim talk about trees talking and about animals talking and about what better example than Perek Shira. Perek Shira is an ancient source which talks about the song that all parts of the creation sing. The wild animals sing a song, the birds sing a song, dogs sing a song. There are aspects of the creation, each sing their song. What bothers many people about this is we're a little uncomfortable talking about, inanimate objects or non-human objects talking and singing. Let me give you two examples. And these are examples that he put to his Rosh Yeshiva. One example is this. We know that, on Shabbos, when you make Kiddush, we cover the challahs, cover the breads. Why do we cover the bread? Well, the reason that's given, if you look it up, is not to embarrass the bread, not to embarrass the challah. We don't want to embarrass that. You know why? Because we're going to make Kiddush over wine, and wine should not take precedence. The precedence should be given to the bread. That's the central pillar of the meal. Bread is always the classic sustaining main aspect of the meal. So we should put in the bread first. The wine is an adjunct to the meal, and you drink it later. But on this occasion, we want to use the wine first because we're making Kiddush. But if you're using the wine first, you're overriding the bread. That's the wrong order of blessings. And in order to embarrass the bread, which is being pushed aside and not giving the correct priority, we cover the challahs. In fact, that's why we have beautiful challah covers, and it's a whole art. My wife makes the most exquisite silk challah covers. People order them from her. She does them to specifications, and I must say it's a bit of a cottage industry here. She makes the silk paintings. I steam them under pressure because that brings out the dyes and the colors and fixes them. And perhaps sometime I'll show you some examples of her challah covers. But the point is Yes, as Max is pointing out, there's another reason for that as well. We cover the challahs not only not to embarrass them, we also cover them because the manna, the man that fell in the desert was between layers of dew, and so it's reminiscent of that. And no doubt the others as well. But the one reason that is given is not to embarrass the bread. And this young yeshiva boy, Lapan, he said to his Rosh Yeshiva, he said, this is a little awkward. Bread doesn't have any feelings. Bread doesn't have feelings. So what do you mean to not embarrass the bread? I mean, why are we using childlike or childish terminology? I mean, bread does not get embarrassed. Say that it's an order of blessings problem, and in order to hide the object that should be made, but to talk about embarrassing the bread, I mean, this is Torah. This is ultimate sophistication, ultimate intellectual sophistication, and you are using terminology that, quite honestly, sounds a little childish. And Torah abounds in these. Here's another example. When Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses, caused the plagues to occur, and he put out his staff or his hand, and he caused, in the first instance, he caused the river to turn to blood. And then he caused the earth or the dust of Egypt, of Mitzrayim, to turn to lice. Those are miracles that he was instructed not to do, right? He was instructed not to do them, to turn the river to blood, which is something that is not ideal, right? And the river was a river that saved him. When he was a little baby, he was put into a basket on the river, and that saved his life. Technically, it saved his life not only because it hit him, but a deeper level of understanding is that the astrologers told Pharaoh that when Pharaoh was throwing the boys into the Nile, okay, the astrologers were waiting for the signal that they would receive astrologically that the Redeemer of the Jewish people had been put into the river. And so indeed, that's what his mother did. She put him in a basket on the river. So they told Pharaoh, don't worry, he's been put into the river. Astrology is never accurate, but it was accurate enough for that. And nevertheless, however you look at it, the river saved his life. And there's a principle of gratitude, or rather avoiding ingratitude. If the river saved your life, you should not be the one to turn it to blood. By the way, as a side point, if I may point out here for thinkers, what's wrong with turning the river to blood? It's a miracle manifesting Hashem's greatness. What's wrong with that? If you were the Nile River, my friends, would you agree to be turned into blood to demonstrate one of the first of Hashem's plagues? Apparently not. Apparently not. The fact that it's a blow to the Egyptians and reveals Hashem's greatness in the world does not change the fact that it is a distortion. It's a distortion for a river that is water to be turned to blood. It's a distortion of the natural. And there's something wrong with that. Something wrong with it to the extent that you should not be doing such a, shall we say, a harmful or distorting thing in the world if you were saved by the river. The conclusion is unavoidable, that when you turn the water to blood, necessary though it may be, part of the Torah though it may be, a revelation of Hashem's greatness as it may be, it's not a good thing. It's a distortion of the natural, and that's not good. Okay, that's a side point. But be that as it is, be that as it may, Moshe was told, this river saved your life. You should not be the one to do that. And similarly, when it came to turning the dust into lice, he was not allowed to do that. Aaron did those two miracles. Why not? Because the earth saved his life by hiding the body of the Egyptian whom he killed. Moshe Rabbeinu used a mystical technique to kill an Egyptian who was beating a Jew. And the body of the Egyptian was buried in the earth long enough for Moshe to escape. And he made it out of Egypt alive. Since the river saved your life, since the dust saved your life, you should not be the one to show the ingratitude of turning it into something that is a distortion of its natural order. You leave that to someone else. What do you see here? That there's a question of gratitude to the river. There's a question of gratitude to the sand. But the problem is the river doesn't have any feelings. And the sand doesn't have any feelings. What do you mean gratitude to a river? I mean, let's be real. There's a statement of the sages, do not throw a stone into a well from which you once drank. You drank from this well. Don't throw a stone into it. Don't muddy the waters of a well you once drank from. Why? It's an ingratitude. But the well has no feeling. The water doesn't mind. It doesn't care. And therefore, you are anthropomorphizing, you're ascribing human emotions and human responses to inanimate objects. And that is not true. And Torah has to be true. And it's not, it is unavoidably childish, if not childlike, childish. That it seems to be the problem. This is the question that he put to his Rosh Yeshiva. Now, how would a great spiritual teacher answer a question like that? Of course, he answered in classical form. He said, "What do you think?" What do you think? Because that's the way you teach. You don't teach you don't teach. Max, I'm not sure what you offering. I don't understand your answer, but anyway, I'm sure it's deep. But let me push on in this direction. The question is, he said to him, "What do you think? You posing me a question. Why are we talking about the bread being embarrassed and the river having gratitude? Why are we doing that? What do you think?" So this is what he said as a young man. He said, "I said to my Rosh Hashiva, I said to him, it's not a question of the feelings of the bread. It's for you. It's for you. That means when you do something that is nominally insulting, when you throw a stone into a well from which you once drank, it's an act of ingratitude. It is true that the river has no feelings. It is true that the well has no feelings. Gratitude or ingratitude to an inanimate object is meaningless objectively. But it's you. You benefited from the source. You should not show ingratitude. And therefore, in terms of your character, this is not a thing you should do." Please raise your hand if you think that's a good answer. Well, the Rosh Hashiva said to him, he said, that doesn't solve the problem at all. That does not solve the problem at all. The reason is, your question was, but it's not true. That's what you said. You said it's not true. That was your problem. The problem is that the river has no feelings. The well has no feelings. Now you're telling me it's for you. That doesn't solve the problem. It may well be a good training exercise for your character. But your problem was, why are you relating to bread as if it has feelings when it does not have feelings? How have you solved that problem? You're telling me a very nice idea. Don't throw a stone into a well which you once drank for, you have the refinement. But your problem was, this is an inanimate object, there's no feelings. So the fact that it's benefiting your character in some way doesn't solve the problem that you're still using a metaphor. You're using an image or a practice in the world which is not intrinsically true. True, it's a beautiful idea. And you're using it in a poetic and metaphorical fashion, and you're using it as a self-development exercise. But it's not true. Do we see that, my friends? Do we see the problem? So he said to Rosh Hashiva, well, okay, what's the answer? So he said to him, you go and think about it. You think about it. He didn't tell him the answer. And Rabbi Lapan said he went and he thought about it all week. And he was learning something during the week, which gave him the key to unlock this issue. And the next week he went back and discussed it with the Rosh Hashiva. And this is an idea I'd like to share with you. This idea depends, by the way, on the Rosh Hashiva, the tells the Rosh Hashiva of Bloch. And you'll find this written in his book, Shiurim. Shiurim, absolutely classic work. I cannot recommend it highly enough. Right? Rav Yosef Yehuda Leib Bloch, great tells Rosh Hashiva. This is printed in 2 volumes. This may have made its way into English. I'm not familiar with an English edition of this, but this was certainly a classic in its time, and it's quite a remarkable book of Torah thought, again, based on very deep ideas, put, generally speaking, not in Kabbalistic terminology, but in more general sort of terminology, very, very original, extremely thought-provoking, and a classic in its own right. But one of the main themes he brings out in this book is the layers of reality. He has some very, very famous analogies there. One very striking one about a person standing in a room of mirrors with one candle, and how many candles does he see? Very, very, very interesting. How many dimensions do you see? It's a very thought-provoking work, but one of its main themes is layers of reality. Let me try to explain what I mean, because this is the key to our idea. Rabbi Lapan said he was learning during the week a Gemara. The Gemara is talking, Tainis, I think it is, a Gemara talking about Rabbi Chanina ben Dosa. Rabbi Chanina ben Dosa and his wife were extremely poor. We're going back to Mishnaic times. They're extremely poor. And famously poor. The Gemara says on one occasion the Mrs. Chanina ben Dosa, she used to bake bread in an empty oven. She was ashamed. The ladies in town, they used to come to this communal oven where they baked. In other words, like a central fire with communal ovens around. And she was embarrassed not to be able to put her dough in the oven. So she went along and she sort of, I don't know, she participated in some way. When she opened the oven, there was bread. Okay. By the way, quite interesting, when the Gemara talks about the miracles that she experienced, the miracles that he experienced, it seems in some way She was even greater than he. Gentlemen, this is not a thing we like to admit, so we'll move rapidly on. But be that as it may, he and his wife were on a tremendous spiritual level. They were part of that generation that could revive the dead. And on one occasion, Shabbos was coming. It was a Friday. There was no food. So his wife said, well, what are we going to do? So he said, leave it to me. And he went out into the field and he prayed, he davened. And in response to his prayer, a hand came down from the higher world and handed him, there are two versions of this Gemara. One was a diamond and one was a golden table leg of a table made out of gold. So he took this table, let's use that version for the present discussion. So, Orion, I think you're thinking of Mrs. Mar Ukva's wife. Here we talk about a Chanina ben Doisa, a slightly different generation, but be that as it may. He took the golden table leg, he went into town, he sold it, and with the money, he bought everything they needed for Shabbos. So he went back home and he puts all the stuff on the table and he says, my wife, here's the food, we can eat on Shabbos. She said to him, where did you get this? So he said, well, I went out into the field, I prayed to Hashem, and Hashem gave me she said, take it back. You know where this came from? This comes from our share in the world to come. If you and I eat this food now, we'll enjoy Shabbos. When we get up to the next world, we'll be sitting at a table missing a leg. Can you imagine? We'll be sitting around, everybody else will be sitting at their sumptuous meals, and you will be sitting there holding onto the leg of the table so the table doesn't collapse. We don't want that. This is temporary, that's permanent. Give it back. He said to look, he said, I think you're making a mistake. If Hashem gave it to me, it's okay. She said, take me to your rabbi. So I think the rabbi was, if I'm not mistaken, I think it was Rebbe. I think Rebbe Rabban Kandla, I forget who it was. So they went and he said to them, what's the problem? So the woman, the husband and wife, she said, look, my husband, he got this miraculous gift. And I'm trying to explain to him that if anything that you get as a miracle in this world comes from your store in the world to come. It's a principle, by the way. It's an important Torah principle, that if Hashem gives you a salvation that comes about miraculously, again, it's not something you and I have to worry about because we don't see open miracles. But if you live in a world of open miracles, if you are saved in explicitly miraculous fashion, it is being taken from your store. Where do miracles come from? Directly from the higher world. And if you merit a miracle in this world, it is paid for by your store in the world to come. There are many sources for this. One classic source is the fact that when Hashem said to Avram, Al tira Avram, scharcha habemun, do not be afraid, Avram, your reward is very great. What happened was Avram waded into a war against 4 kings, right? You're talking about a multinational empire, the collected armies of 4 nations, and eventually into battle with one helper, or a couple hundred at most, according to different versions, a few hundred, and he won the war. And he must have been afraid. That is miraculous. When you attack an international empire with 4 armies, and you win with a handful of Talmudic scholars, or maybe just one assistant, that is coming from another world. Hashem said, do not be afraid, I preserve your reward. But the fact that Hashem had to reassure him that he would not lose his reward, we learn from this and other sources that when you have a reward that's given miraculously, it comes from your reward in the higher world. And therefore she said, we don't want this. We have nothing to eat on Shabbos, then live in a world of eternity where we are lacking. So the rabbi said, look, your husband's right, it's okay, no problem. Don't worry, your husband's right, eat the food. She said, I don't accept that. He said, look, Mrs. Ben-Dosa, I promise you, if you end up in the next world and your table is lacking a leg, I promise you I'll give you mine. That's what he said. Do what your husband says, take the food, eat it, and if you are lacking anything in the world to come across to me, I'll give you my table leg. She said, Rama, doesn't the Talmud say that in the world to come we don't see each other? We won't be seeing each other. In fact, the Gemara says that in the world to come, every righteous individual has a dwelling place of their own. That's called Madu Lefi Kvoidoi. This needs long discussion, but from one perspective, we're all utterly alone, or shall I say husband and wife are permanently bonded into each other as a unit. I always say it's good news for some of us, a little distressing for others, but be that as it may, we will exist in that world and see no one else. And therefore, you won't be able to see me to give you your table leg. He thought about it and he said to Rav Chanina, take the food back. take it back. So once again, the woman won the day, won the argument. And so what did they do? This is what the Rebbe said. He took the food, he went back to the market, he sold it, took the money, went and bought back the golden table leg, went out into the field, held it up, and a hand came down and took it. And Devorah, I'm not sure what your question means. I'll have to think about it. Maybe email me a more clear version. Excuse me, time to talk in the next world. Husband and wife are together. I think I made that clear. Husband and wife together in the next world. We're talking about seeing others outside of that husband-wife unit. There is another dimension from which we'll all be together in the world to come unified in a spiritual core, which is called Knesset Israel. But this is not our subject today. So a hand came down and took the golden table leg and took it back. And the Gemara ends by saying that was a greater miracle than the first. The first miracle that this gift came down from the higher world is not that miraculous, but that it gets taken back is extremely miraculous. Why? Because from the higher world, they give but do not take. In other words, the spiritual world gives but does not take. So a miracle of having shefa, bounty from the spiritual world, that's understandable, but to have something taken back, that is that's ultra miraculous. Anyway, that's the story. That's the story. By the way, as an aside in the story, this is not our point directly, but I'd just like to make this point. Think about it for a moment. She was right in the end. That means that she was quite right that this was something probably they would lose a share of in the world to come. And therefore the rabbi made a mistake. Chanina ben Dosa made a mistake. When he was given that table leg, right, or that diamond, whatever it was, that was not good. He thought it was good because it gave them Shabbos food, but in fact it would have been an eternal loss. And the question is, why did Hashem do that to him? He prayed for it and Hashem gave it to him, but it was a tragic outcome. Why would Hashem do that? Why would Hashem mislead him in that way? And the answer is Hashem didn't mislead him. He gave him a wife. He gave him a wife who could teach him the correct course of action. Hashem doesn't play unfair. Anyway, that means, gentlemen, occasionally you need to listen to your wife. Very occasionally. But anyway, the point is that's what you need to do. So what do we see from this story? Rabbi Laban said when he was learning that Gemara, it suddenly struck him something that is absolutely essential. And that is, when a diamond, let's say a diamond is received from the higher world, or gold, let's say, is received, what is the meaning of gold in the higher world? Gold is useless in that world. Gold or diamonds, money, whatever it is useful in this world. But if it comes down from a higher world, what does it mean that gold is given from a higher world? When you leave this world and you enter the world to come and you're sitting at your table, right, eating your food, etc., surely that is not material. Surely we're talking about a completely spiritual, transcendent reality. And he suddenly realized the meaning is that value in that world, when it crosses the border into this world, takes on the aspect of this world, right? That means in that world, you're talking about something that we can only use metaphorical and allegorical language for. You're talking about eating a meal, sitting at a table made of gold. These are terminologies we use to explain something completely transcendent. But when that transmits itself into this world, obviously it has to take on value in this world. You can't sell abstract spirituality in this world. You can only sell gold. And he suddenly realized the principle must be that every time you cross a border, you change currency. Let me say that one more time. When you cross a border, you change currency. You know, I see on this webinar a few South Africans, right? I see a few South Africans. I'm honored and very happy to see Des is with us, and I can see a few other South Africans as well. If you bring rands, right? You bring South African rands into London. Okay, you got to change them. There was a time, by the way, where you could get some money for the rands. Today, I'm not sure about that, but the point is, you got to change the currency. When you cross a border, you change currency. And therefore, the principle must be that when you cross a border from a spiritual world to a material world, you change the currency. The value must be changed into what has value in that world. And what has value in this world, when you transcend into a higher world, must transmute itself into what's appropriate value in that world. Exactly like when you cross a border, you change currency into what goes and what is of transactional value in that world. That must be the principle. And that, by the way, is the major principle of the Shiurei Das. And it's a principle he uses time and again. Of course, we're talking about Telzah Torah. And so the Telzah Rosh Hashivarat, this is the source. And in that book, he gives you many fantastic examples of transmutations from one world to another in Torah literature. And he applies this principle very broadly, and it's a masterpiece from that point of view. But that's the principle. You change value from one world to another. And therefore, he went back the next Shabbos and he said to Rosh Hashiva, the answer to the question is, bread indeed can be embarrassed. You know why? Because bread in this world is only bread, but it's been projected into this world from a hand. That means that when Hashem performs a miracle for you, he's reaching out a hand to you and doing something in this world, and you see objects in this world move, but it's his hand moving them. When you throw a stone into a well from which you once drank, you're throwing a stone into an outstretched hand, a manifestation of the divine in the world, and it goes all the way back to the source. My friends, think about this for a moment. When I shake your hand, right, I give you a warm handshake. What's happening here? What's happening is that anatomical structures, flesh and blood, right, are making contact. But there's a meaning to this. There's a transmission of that physical action into your personality and your perception and your mind and your heart, right? Think about this for a moment. How is a child conceived? Without going into too much detail, a child is conceived by physical action. We have sources that say that are no less than absurd. You're talking about physical engagement in a way that is absurd. But inside the physical is a life force being transmitted. Right? I'll give you another example. Let's say you want to show love for your friend. You give them a warm embrace. You hug your friend. What's happening is two bodies are coming, but inside that physical action is transmuting itself and projecting itself into a reality in a higher world. It's less material, but it's more meaningful. And the whole world functions that way. When you speak to a human being, you are using the interface of a body. You're talking about looking at a face and a body, and that's all you ever see of a human being. But that's not the meaningful level. That's only a method of transduction, a method of transmuting or transmitting from one domain to another, from one dimension to another. And we do it seamlessly. When you talk to someone, you're making sound waves with physical organs that go into you're talking about a physical, but it's transmuted into something much more meaningful, more abstract, less material, but more real. And therefore, you need to know that every manifestation in the material world is an outstretched hand. It has meaning. Right? When someone writes you a letter expressing great love, and you take that letter and you have a very, very strong emotional reaction. On the one hand, this is a mere physical phenomenon. It's a piece of paper with some ink on it. On the other hand, it's an extension of a human being. Now, of course, you need to have a delicate balance here. If you start making a fetish out of physical objects, you've taken it too far. But if you ignore the physical object as being insignificant, as somehow being detached from Hashem, you're making an equally great mistake. And therefore, the Ramban's teaching is that every natural phenomenon in the world is also miraculous. It comes from the same source. It doesn't matter whether it comes from a source more directly, and you see an unusual constellation of movement of details in the physical world, or it's more distant where you see something that looks more natural, something like what you are more used to. Maybe you're sure I have to think about this shiur that you're talking about. I'll need to look it up. I'm not sure what the comment is that you're sending me. Please, if you're kind enough to email it to me, I'll try to look it up. But the Ramban says what he says. So even if you see a contradiction at some place, we'll have to resolve it. But this Ramban is very, very famous and very, very central. And therefore, the message we learn and the thought I'd like to leave you with, Hanukkah is teaching exactly the message of the miraculous moving through into the material. That's exactly the point, right? When you win a war, a group of guerrillas, according to some opinions, there were only 13 of them. 13 yeshiva bochri, never handled a weapon before. They went out to give their lives against the Greek Empire with 10,000 war elephants and, right? So some historians say, well, they were guerrillas, they were very effective, they knew the territory, they were more motivated. By the time they finished, it was completely natural. The point is that when you see an event in the world like that, right, as a Jew, you take it back to its source. True, it manifests in a more natural way. And true when things that are even less miraculous than that, oil burning for one day, not burning for the extra 7 days, oil burning for one day. You sure it's perfectly natural. Oil is a combustible mixture of hydrocarbons and the oxygen. That's a natural explanation, but it's a projection of something that's not natural at all. Right? When somebody stretches out their hand to you, or they embrace you, or they shake your hand, or engage you physically in any way, you have to be at a very vulgar level of human sensitivity to see only the material. When you see a human being as only a body, you're at a very undeveloped level of spiritual sensitivity. On the other hand, people are bodies, and that's inseparable from the soul, and you need the body, and the body needs respect. But the reason the body needs respect, and you treat a person's bodily needs with great respect, and you honor the body by clothing it with dignity and all the things we do to the body. We only do that because the body houses a soul. We only do it because the body projects something deeper. And therefore, there's a delicate balance here. You're not relating to the body as body. That's idolatrous and indeed childish. But when you relate to the body as a projection of a soul, that means every interaction with this body, you're aware if this body is manifesting a person. And when you interact with the body and embrace it, or show a kindness to the body, or grasp someone's hand or embrace them, you're doing that only because indeed you're engaging the body, but it's because you're projecting into the inner being of the person as well. And therefore, when you see a river or a well or a bread, whatever it is in the world, you are seeing an outstretched hand with an object being given by a giver. And if you take the object with no relationship to the giver, you're on a very insensitive level of human awareness. And when you show gratitude, or you manifest something correctly in the world, and you treat the world around you correctly, whether it's ecologically, or whether it's whatever it may be, on a global level or on a personal level, you deal with the world in a mature fashion, so that the world itself and its objects are dealt with respect. It's not because they have meaning in themselves, but it's because they're a projection of a being whose oneness manifests all the way through reality to the very last details of the material. Anyway, thank you very much. Oh, Devorah is saying that her objection is that Hashem doesn't have feelings either. Devorah, nothing could be further from the truth. Nothing could be further from the truth. What kind of a parent doesn't have feelings? What kind of a parent? Hashem's feelings of love for the world are so great that he created you. And we can strengthen him, we can weaken him, we can give him pleasure, we can cause him anguish. Of course, we're only talking about Hashem's name. We're not talking about essence. That's beyond our consideration. We know that there's an effect there, but we don't understand what that is. But his name is given us in manifestation. Absolutely, clearly, as a person, as a persona. No question about that. And therefore, we are talking about Hashem's love. We're talking about his anguish. And we have a very, very personal relationship with him. Absolutely. We are on the phase where that's hidden. That's true. And it's much more difficult from behind the veil. Anyway, thank you very much for this opportunity to learn a bit together. Thank you to Ariel. Thanks to my daughter Nechama. Thanks to all of you. Thanks for your help again and support. I appreciate it greatly. Together, Mitzvah Shem, we can do more and do good things together. I have a book in Mitzvah Shem coming out soon, which is about Shabbos and Yom Tov. Also contains a little bit of Hanukkah material, but and I hope you'd enjoy that. Please don't forget to adjust your email so that you get the newsletter, so that I can stay in touch with you and let you know when we do more of these. And please feel free, email me through the site or my private email at any time. And it'd be a pleasure to interact with you. Thank you very much again. Have a wonderful Hanukkah and all the best.